something similar. I know it's talking.
We are glad that you're here tonight for our Bible class time. We enjoy Wednesday nights for several reasons. One, the fellowship meal, and so there's two words there, right? Fellowship and meal, both of which I enjoy. So yeah, I like Wednesday night. Tonight was especially good. I even got coffee to drink with my meals. So that's a good thing. And if you're not coming early to eat, you ought to start doing that. Come and have dinner with us. We enjoy that time of fellowship. And then, of course, during this time, we are studying through the book of James. And the reason we're doing that is to move in God's direction. We want to make sure that we're taking steps, necessary steps, in order to be pleasing to God. Of course, the book of James was written by whom? James. And what was his dog's name? No idea. Nobody knows. The Bible didn't tell us. He may have had one, but I don't know if he did or not, but just want to make sure you're paying attention tonight, okay? So we don't know a lot of details. We do know a few things about James. What are some of the things that we know about James? Brother of Jesus, most likely. Most theologians think that's the case. What else? He was an apostle. Was this James an apostle? Huh? Probably beheaded. All right, let's go back to this apostle thing. Was this James the same James that is an apostle? Was he an apostle? No, not an apostle. But he was a what?
Believer.
A believer. Yeah, he was a believer. We even know where he lived. Where did he live? On Dogwood Avenue. in Nazareth, right? All right, so the city of Nazareth, we know that's where he grew up. And by the time he's writing this book, we know from biblical history, there's lots of people that do historical studies about, where things are written from and those kind of things. We know for sure that James, by this point, is living in Jerusalem and is one of the leaders of the church in the city of Jerusalem. Do we ever hear anything about Jerusalem today? Yeah? What have you heard recently about Jerusalem? Wars. Still fighting over land and other things, right? So wars still raging. In Jerusalem, it's interesting that a lot of the world's religion, certainly three of the major world religions, all claim Jerusalem as their starting point, as their home, which is kind of interesting. It's almost like people groups in the area that also claim Jerusalem as their possession or their home. So in that case, this war that's happening now, even some would argue that there is some overlap here. That not only is it a war over property rights and those kind of things, but it also is a religious war in some ways. These groups that are warring certainly have differences of opinion when it comes to religious matters, right? Certainly that's the case. So James is in a city where all kinds of things are happening, including the teaching of the gospel. So he has heard the gospel, and the gospel is what? The good news of Jesus Christ, specifically the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. So that's the gospel. The good news is of his death, his burial, and his resurrection. And many people have been teaching and preaching by this point in the city of Jerusalem, including the apostles. Peter seems to have been leading the way, and others. But by this point in time in church history, James has certainly come to the top as one of the leaders of the local church. So he writes this book, and we've talked about it before. It's a bullet point kind of things, right? Hey, do this, do this, do this, do this, control this, change this. And he's giving us things that we need to live out the Christian life. So that's what the book of James is about. And ultimately, we learn from the book of James this truth, and that is, if we don't quit, we win. We don't quit, we win. And so the question then is, well, how many of us are interested in winning? What is he talking about winning here, right? Salvation is ultimately what he's talking about. The Christian race, this Christian life, we overcome the devil, the tempter, and so he's teaching us, if we don't quit, if we stay faithful, we ultimately win. So we've been talking about different things from the book, and of course we've covered now the first few chapters, first couple of chapters anyway, and we're in chapter 3, but with a flashback to chapter 1. In James chapter 1, verse 26, the Bible says, if you claim to be religious, but don't have control over your tongue, you are fooling yourself, and your religion is worthless. So we are on a lesson that we're entitling here, Taming the Tongue, and we've decided already, we talked about this last week even, that really ultimately here, what is he talking about? Is he talking about like literally holding your tongue? Have you ever tried to do that, by the way? Like try to hold your tongue. It's almost impossible physically too, isn't it? But that's not even really what he's talking about. What's he talking about?
Your heart.
Your heart. So he's talking about like managing or maintaining, controlling your heart. And so we started this chapter by looking at really three things here. The first thing we talked about and wanted to remind you of tonight is this, that my words will determine my destination. My words will determine my destination. We will end up where we go based on our words. So we got to make sure that we tame our tongue or control our tongue, right? It's an important thing. It's a life and death matter. James even teaches that it is a matter of life and death to control your tongue. The second thing we talked about is this, that my words can do what? Destroy what I have. Relationships, can our words destroy relationships? Just like that, right? Quickly, that can happen. So words can destroy a relationship. As a matter of fact, somebody probably this past week at Thanksgiving didn't go to a family event because somebody had hurt their feelings or something, or said something about them. A person that we know has kind of disowned their family because one of the family members said something about their kids. Interestingly enough, they say the same thing about their kids. Isn't that interesting? But it's depending on who says it and how they say it, right? And so our words can destroy what we have. Can it destroy more than just relationships? Again, yes. It literally can destroy lives, can it? How many times have we seen a road rage incident that escalates with words, and then those words quickly then lead into other things, and somebody ends up dead as a result of some word that was said, right? So our words can destroy what we have. The third thing that we talked about last week, or the last time we studied together from the book of James, was the fact that my words always, not just sometimes, but always reveal my heart. My words show my heart, right? We talked about specifically there even that idea that sometimes we're trying to control things like curse words, right? And all of us probably know a bunch of curse words and things like that. So what happens though is, if you let your heart say that word, right? Somebody cuts you off in traffic and your heart says that curse word, eventually what happens? You slip up and it comes out of your mouth, right? And then your kids or somebody from church that you're riding with that day says, "What'd you say?" And now it reveals what's in your heart, right? And so we got to be careful. It really is a matter of working on our heart. So it's a heart thing. When I was in school working on a Bible degree, one of the classes that I took was a class taught by a man named Wendell Winkler. And he had written a book, and the title of the book was Heart Diseases and Their Cures. Some of you have heard that book probably. Heart Diseases and Their Cures. And I thought, what a great title for a book talking about spiritual matters, right? Because that's what it is. It's a matter of heart, and so we got to work on it. So the question then that we left off with is, so what do we do? Right? So what do we do? So what do you think? So what do we do? Well, of course, James is going to give us some teaching here in the chapter 3 that'll help us with that. If you have your Bibles, and I hope you do, turn over to James chapter 3, and somebody's going to read for us verses 7 and 8. James chapter 3, verses 7 and 8. If you don't have your physical Bible with you, there's one on the pew in front of you most likely, or somewhere close by. There's also this thing, it's an amazing thing, like Bible Gateway on my phone, right? I have like 150 different translations of the Bible at my fingertips. Or you can even just Google it, and it'll come up that way. But somebody who's there in James chapter 3, read for us verses 7 and 8.
For every kind of beast and bird or reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind. But no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil full of deadly poison.
Now, doesn't sound good so far, right? So James says, every kind of beast that you can imagine of the land and of sea has been tamed, right? And the tongue, no man can tame. So does that mean that it's impossible, that there's just no hope? That we should just leave and call it good enough? Do what? Got to try and keep trying harder and harder and harder. Okay.
All things are possible with God.
All things are possible through Him. Okay. So with man it's impossible, but with God it would be possible.
Well, you have to fill your heart with the positive, so that's what comes out.
All right. So an interesting principle here, and I think this is kind of heading in the direction we want to head. Okay. She says, you've got to fill your heart with the good, with positive, so that then is what comes out. So if you can't control your tongue, if it's going to show eventually, right? That's what that other verse said. Your tongue reveals your heart. It shows your heart. So the thing to do is fill your heart with the right stuff, so that when your tongue shows up and shows out, what it shows is a heart close to God. So we got to work on our hearts, don't we? We've got to start working on our hearts. Here's the first thing we've got to do. We've got to allow God to change my heart. Is change easy? Some folks love change, right? Some folks love it. As a matter of fact, we have a friend of ours. She and her husband have differences of opinion on this. She loves change so much that he'll go to work and come home and all the furniture will be moved around. And he complains about it all the time, right? She loves change and he hates it, right? So there may be some of us that love change, right? Some change is good. Sometimes you get something or you do something differently, you change something and you realize, hey, this really is good. How many of you have ever said something like this? I wish we had done this sooner. I wish we had done this years ago. Or I should have changed that when I first found out about it, right? As a matter of fact, probably if we would apply this in a lot of areas in life, it'd really be easier, right? I eat differently now than I did when I was a little kid, right? When I was a little kid, I was like Brewer. I wanted like chicken and tacos. I didn't want any vegetables or anything like that. So then, though, as you get older and your taste buds change some, you realize, hey, that's pretty good. You think back and you think, what? Man, had I started eating better sooner, I might be healthier, I might be skinnier, I might be this or that, right? And so you look at those things. Same thing in a lot of areas of life. You look at it and you think, man, had I just stuck with, how many of us have ever started like an exercise plan of some sort, right? Or how many of us back like in high school, like used to run track or play some sport or something, and we were like physically active all the time and felt good, and then for whatever reason the change was not a positive one but a negative one, and we ended up just kind of sitting around more, right? And now we think, what? I need to change what I'm doing and go back to exercising some. As a matter of fact, it's almost January. Can you believe it's almost January already? Almost January, and some of us will be making New Year's resolutions to do what? To make some big changes in our life. To make some big changes. They might be good if we'll stick with them. As a matter of fact, look at what James says. There on your handout you see like 3 different verses, right? So here's what I want to do. I want to assign these to people. Do you have the handouts for tonight? Did you get those? You don't have them? All right, so there's some more out there on the table. I want to make sure everybody gets one if you can. So we've got people springing into action to go get handouts, or either running from class. It could go really either way. I know, right? All right, so what's the next verse on your handout there? We're just going to go right down that list, okay, on your handout. And there's like 3 in each section. I think there's one that only has 1 verse, and then there's one section that has like just 2. But this first one I think has 3, right? Or 4. How many does it have there?
2.
Oh, just 2.
Hebrews and Psalms.
All right, Hebrews and Psalms. Somebody read for us. Somebody pick one and turn, and somebody else turn to one of the other verses. We're talking about, so what do we do, right? You find them? No, that's before. No, it should say Taming the Tongue on page 1. Okay, so on the handouts, I'm just making sure that everybody has the one. Can I see that other side of that one? On the front side of your handout, it should look like this. It says the Book of James, Taming the Tongue is the title on that page. That's where we are. I want to make sure that everybody's on the same one. Book of James, Taming the Tongue, and we've covered and reviewed the whole first page. And so then we're asking, so what to do and what not to do. On the back of the second page there, starting with Hebrews chapter 8, verses 10 through 12, and then Psalm 19, verse 14. If you don't have one of those, we'll put some more out on the table back there, and you can get them before next class, okay? We want everybody to have them. So, all right. Somebody that's there in the book of Hebrews, somebody read for us.
For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says the Lord. I will put my laws in their minds and write them on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. None of them shall teach his neighbor, and none his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for all shall know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them. For I will be merciful to their unrighteousness, and their sins and their lawless deeds I will remember no more.
Okay, so it sounds like a good verse, right, about forgiveness ultimately. But what does he say here? Change comes from the heart, again, is the idea of the text. If you look at it contextually, what he's talking about here, again, is a book, the book of Hebrews, written to Jewish Christians, right? And he's saying basically the same principle there. He says, like, write my laws on your heart. There should not be a need to like be always reminding somebody of something. Instead, it ought to just be written in our hearts. So if we don't even have our Bibles, right? If somebody took your Bible away, you ought to be able to just say, okay, I am able to kind of discern right and wrong, or what God's will would be versus the other option, because I know God. And as a result of my knowing God and allowing Him to work on my heart, then what has happened? I have been changed, right? I have been changed. And I think different and act different and respond differently to different situations. So here's our heart. And what's God wanting to do? Change it. Work on it. Work on it, right? All right, look at that other text over in the book of Psalm. This is an Old Testament text. Somebody who's there, read for us. You know that one by heart? Probably a lot of us do once you start reading the text, right? This is one of those verses, by the way, that's kind of like John 11:35, right? You can quote John 11:35. There you go. Jesus wept. That's right. And so, like, once you hear the first word, you know the next one, right? All right, who's there? Read for us.
Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer.
All right, so God's desire, our prayer should be much like this, right? Lord, let the meditation of my heart, right? Let my heart be thinking about what? You. Let it be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord. That text really even is interesting to me, because look at what the psalmist says ultimately, or throughout that text. He says, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord. So again, what's he teaching us here probably? Could it be that the mouth and the heart are somehow connected? I think so, right? That there's some connection, some tie between our mouth and our heart. So, oh Lord, let what my heart thinks about and what my mouth says be acceptable to you. By the way, while we're there, challenge thought for tonight, okay? Something to really think about for a minute. What makes a curse word a curse word?
Sometimes it's the word itself, but sometimes it's the way that it's used.
Sometimes Camilla says, sometimes it's the word itself, and sometimes it's the way it's used. The intention. Okay? What do you think? What? It's the way you think in your heart? Absolutely that, for sure. So, there's an interesting discussion happening right now, and I don't know if you even are aware of this or not, but there is an interesting conversation going on in the religious world. Okay, this I guess theologians are kind of talking through this, but it started really with a bunch of college students who said, hey, we are Christians, but we believe that what makes a curse word is not so much the word itself. We would be free to say any word we wanted to, but the intent that's behind it. And so there has been some research done and some studies done. There's a guy who's working on a doctorate in theology who's focusing on this idea of language itself, like the actual word. Is the word the problem, or is it something else? Is the question that he's posing, right? So what do you think? If we were helping with that research, what would you say? Is it the word? And your mama would probably say it's the word, right? Because if you say it, then what happens? Everybody around you goes, I'm going to wash your mouth out. Which, if anybody ever does that. I don't know if anybody ever did that in the first place, but certainly if they ever do it anymore. But, some of you have personal experience, it looks like. All right, all right, so somebody said, yes, the word. Man, if I said the word, even if I was just joking, right? So the heart isn't meaning it the way that the word is. You see the paradigm kind of? So here's this person that just says it jokingly, but they still get in trouble for it.
Well, but some words have a bad connotation. I don't care how you use it. It is not a word that is mentioned in polite company.
All right, some words have a bad connotation. Doesn't matter how you use them. It's just words you shouldn't use in mixed company is what you have there. But any company probably.
First time I saw this particular 4-letter word written on a barn somewhere, and I came home and I asked my mother about it, and I found out that's a word I had not heard before, but it was a word that I was not to ever use.
Okay.
There's no situation that I can think of where that would be a happy word.
Yeah.
Something pleasant to hear.
All right. So sometimes the words themselves. Does language change over time?
Yes.
Some words that used to be kind of like curse words maybe eventually are kind of overlooked. Are there some words like that are more commonplace now?
By some people,
I know some words that are said even like on television, like not HBO or some channel like that, but instead just like ABC and CBS, right? That a few years ago you would have probably never heard, right? One time my daddy was preaching, and immediately after he got through, Brantley, our oldest one, he was a little kid at the time, called me and said, "Daddy, Granddaddy said a bad word in his sermon." I said, "Oh, you're kidding. We finally got it." And they said, "Yeah, he really did. He said a bad word." I said, "What did he say?" He said, "I can't say it." I said, "Why can't you say it?" I said, "Okay, I'm going to give you permission. You can say it this one time." And he said, "Granddaddy said, shut up." Well, I went back and looked at the sermon. What he actually said is, some people say some things that they ought not say. They ought to just shut up. And when he said it, Brantley just thought he had said a terrible word. Why? Well, because we used to tell our kids, we don't say that word. As a matter of fact, Paige still tells her 5th grade class we don't say that word. And so sometimes she'll come home and say, so-and-so in my class today said so-and-so, the other kid said the S word. And she'll be like, okay, which one? But that's an interesting thought, isn't it? Ultimately, though, we know this from those texts that what? The mouth and the heart are connected, and God needs to be allowed to change our heart. We need to allow Him to change our heart. So how can we allow Him to change our heart? How do we let this happen? Reading His Word is an essential step in that process, okay? Reading His Word is allowing Him to speak to our hearts, isn't it? Reading His Word is allowing Him to speak to our hearts. So you can do that several ways. I think you ought to probably spend some time at least with a physical Bible in your hand reading some. You can do that, of course, we talked about it already tonight, electronic versions and things like that. I do my daily Bible reading with an app that's called the Daily Radio Bible. And so there's a lot of options, right? But you ought to let God speak to you, right? Allow Him to speak to you. To do that, you have to hear His Word.
Imitation. Imitate Him as much as you can.
Imitating Him. Yeah. Imitating Him. Doing what He does. Right? Doing what He does will help in that process. Right? Allowing Him to change my heart. What if I pray, Lord, change my heart? What am I doing? I'm inviting Him, asking Him into my life, right? What else can we do to allow this process to happen? What about being with other people that are engaged in the process?
Choose the right purpose
Yeah, choosing the right group of friends. All of those things help us with this process of allowing God to change my heart. The second thing that we need to do is this. If we're asking, okay, so what do we do to tame our tongue, to work on this issue? The second thing that we need to do is this. We need to put a filter on what I allow into my heart, right? I need to put a filter on what I allow into my heart. We ought to govern it and check it. We ought not allow just any and everything to go into our heart, because it kind of like builds up there, right? It stays there and leads us that direction. So we ought to put a filter on what we allow into our hearts. We talked about this recently, by the way, when we were talking about somebody that might be addicted to pornography or something like that. They might want to put a filter on their computer, right? There's systems and things you can put in place that would block those sites, and that might be the filter that helps them to overcome, right? So what kind of filter? Well, let's read these texts. There's a couple of texts again on your handout. Somebody who's got the first one, read for us. You can read it from your handout, or if you want to turn over in your Bible to the text. Not everybody all at once, really. I mean, this is out of control.
O generation of vipers, how can ye, being evil, speak good things? But out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks.
All right.
I'm
sorry. Let me stop you right there and then we'll resume, okay? So here's this first idea that what? Here's this group of people that are wicked people, right? Vipers is the reference there. Then he says what? Out of the heart, the mouth speaks. All right, keep reading.
A good man out of the good treasure of the heart bringeth forth good things. An evil man out of the evil treasure bringeth forth evil things.
A good man from the good treasures in his heart brings forth more good. But an evil man with evil treasures produces evil things. So what do you think the point of that text is? What's the purpose of that verse? Pardon?
To point at the heart.
To point at the heart? What do you mean by that?
Whatever's in there is what you get.
Whatever is in there is what you get. So how do we filter that? How do we control what we put in?
You control what you live in. Like watching TV, you're not going to watch something that's not good, because it will get into your heart and your mind, and you know.
Okay? So you have some control, physical control over it, like what you're watching on TV, right? If you just listen to the same stuff and it's not good, it builds up, right? It kind of becomes toxic to us. And then that just produces that out of our life, right? So give me some examples then, maybe something that I ought to at least filter my watching.
Bad words, like if you're watching TV and a lot of songs these days, they have really bad words.
Okay.
If you listen to those bad words, sooner or later those bad words are going to come out.
Okay. So the songs maybe is one of the areas that we filter, right? We're cautious about what we listen to. How would we combat if, like, I hear a song with bad words? Is there a way to combat that or to filter that?
Turn it off.
Turn it off and do what?
Find something better. Praise music.
Praise music, yeah. So maybe if here's this song that I've heard that is bad, maybe a good filter or a good way to filter it, you know what I mean, like to deal with it, would to be then replace it with praise songs, worship kind of songs. You with me? So, does it take more though to filter out the bad? Probably, right? Probably. All right, give me another example.
I have to filter the
News. Boy, that one's, I think, a big one. We sometimes people watch the news. How many of you watch news like by the time you get up and then it just kind of stays on all day, every day? We know some folks that are kind of like that have some news channels just kind of constantly playing in the background. And what happens? All that negative stuff just builds up, and before you know it, you're aggravated at the world, and it comes out. And
Especially when it's political advertising. I'm thankful that's so.
political advertisements are especially, it seems, potent, aren't they? All right, a lot of negative, that's right. All right, so you get that idea.
Another one would be consider the conversations in which you find yourself in.
Okay, consider conversations that you find yourself in. What do you mean by that? Tell me more.
Well, like, sometimes it's easy to kind of be like, well, you hear about, you're with your family and you're talking about, you know, your sister or your, you know, your cousin who's in this wild lifestyle or
Okay.
whatever. And you could sit and be, you know, gossip about them. And
There's the word,
talk
okay,
about-
yeah. Yeah, all right, so you're in a situation where there's gossip going on. What might we do?
Walk away.
Walk away,
Change the subject.
change the subject, change the hairdresser,
Say something good that they've done.
say something good that they've done. Okay? It is interesting, a lot of times if you combat the bad, then everybody realizes that you're not interested in hearing it and they change the subject or move on. So that's interesting. All right, what else? Any other examples like these? Those are great ones, by the way.
Facebook, social media.
Now, man, we were doing good till you got on everybody's toes all of a sudden. He said social media, like Facebook,
That's what I meant.
and other things. Kayla said that's what she meant when she said news, because she doesn't actually watch it. Otherwise, she just gets the news from social media. And yeah, that's a big one, right? By the way, one easy way to follow that, or to do that, or to filter that, is be aware of what and who you like and follow, right? And you can always follow. It's amazing how quick the feed changes, right? Based on what you're talking about, and or based on like things that I've liked,
Yeah.
right? If I like a certain thing, that the algorithm, is that how you say it, automatically says, okay, well, he must be really interested in, you know, exotic cars, and so now all of a sudden everything I get on my feed is about cars, and so, you know, you can kind of filter that, right? So be aware. All right, so you got that one, right? Is there another verse there on the handout?
Yes.
All right, give me the next one. Proverbs what? 4:23. Proverbs 4:23.
Keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it spring the issues of life.
Keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it springs the issues of life. Have issues? It came from your heart, right? It comes from on the inside. There is a lot of good that comes from meditating on the right thing and thinking the right way and spending time in that stuff, right? So by controlling that or managing that to the very best of our abilities, we are filtering what we allow into our hearts. So you might want to take up yoga, right? You might want to meditate some every day. You might want to play classical music and praise and worship music. You might want to rethink some of those kind of things, like what podcast you're listening to, what you're looking at social media wise. All of those things all feed into this, right? So we need to first allow God to change our hearts, and then make sure that we're involved in putting the filter in place, right? To say, okay, God, I am doing my part. That's the thing here, right? The filter part is my part. The God part is God, all right? So we ask God to help, and then we put the filter in place. Now, the third thing is this. We decide to speak words of life. There's a song that we sometimes sing that says, "Sing them over again to me. Wonderful words of life. Let me more of their beauty see. Wonderful words of life." What do you think? Are there some words or some things that are especially good to put in place? This is the vitamin part, okay? This is like the extra boost to the process. These words that we speak, okay? So if we're thinking about and working on these words to say, there's several of these that I want to give you real quickly. I want you to just kind of look at the handout there. Let me borrow your handout again for just a second now that you're through writing. So on the handout here at the bottom on number 3, right, we're going to decide to speak words of life and these words of, and then there's different ones. Okay, I'm going to give you these 4 or 5 words real quickly that'll make a difference. All right, here's the first one. We need to decide to speak words of what? Affection. What do we mean by that? Showing love, kindness. We need to speak kind words. You know, your mama probably said what my mama said. If you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. There's probably some truth to that, but what the Bible teaches is this: not only should you not say anything at all, but you really ought to find something good to say. Okay? Not only should you not speak bad, but you ought to find something good to say instead. Read the verses there, somebody.
The word aptly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver.
Now, listen to this again. These words are like golden apples and silver place setting. They can either be words that are good and delicious and appealing, or I guess the opposite would be true too, right? These words could be anything but. So we ought to be speaking words that are kind and considerate and helpful kind of words. The second one is this: we ought to speak words of praise. I ought to speak words of praise. Somebody read the text. It's right underneath where you wrote in the word. Do what?
That was the text.
Oh, that was the text. So we skip one then. Let me have your thing for a minute. All right, so the words of affection, Matthew chapter 3, verses 16 and 17. Speaking of whom we love and whom we are well pleased. God says, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased," right? So words of affection. Then these words of praise, words that are especially good, kind and sweet and caring. Then the next one is this: words of encouragement. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29, words of encouragement. Do not let anything unwholesome come out of your mouth. Don't let any bad talk come out of your mouth, but only what is helpful for, watch this, building others up according to their needs. And then, of course, words of healing. That idea of words of healing is that the tongue can tear down or it can build up. It can heal, right? And then, of course, words of faith or words of belief would certainly apply there. Romans chapter 4, verse 17. Here, Abraham has such great faith that he says, "Hey, whatever it is, God, you want me to do, I will do it." Right? So let's review these words one more time. Here's the list, okay? So we have decided, first of all, to allow God to change our heart. Secondly, to put a filter on what I allow into my heart. Third, to then speak these words of life. Words of affection, words of praise, words of encouragement, words of healing, and words of faith. If we do that, James says, you can begin to control that little member. That despite being a little member of the body, really makes a difference of both life and death. So what about it? Are we faithfully obeying God's will? Are we working on our heart and thereby working on our mouth? I hope we are. I hope each of us would say, yes, I'm going to try my best to do better when it comes to that. Somebody even leaves here tonight and says, I'm not going to say that word anymore. I'm going to put a filter on it. I'm going to really work on it. And hey, we kind of laugh, but according to James and a lot of folks I know, this really is an issue. It's a struggle for a lot of people. We want you to know that we love you and care about you and are here to help you. And if we can help with that in any way, please let us know, because it's part of the plan for a Christian as we faithfully obey God's will, because we want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. We want salvation to be ours. So, with that being said, we welcome everybody back in, and we want to take just a minute to remind you again that we're moving in God's direction. And if we're moving in God's direction, it means that we're doing some things that we ought to be doing, that we're making an effort to do what needs to be done. So here's a picture that's worth 1,000 words tonight. Somebody might say this picture's worth more than 1,000 words. It's a beautiful cup of coffee. You know, some of us will do all kinds of things, right, to make special effort to get that cup of coffee. Some folks, it's in the morning. Some folks, it's all day. Some folks, it's morning and night. Sometimes, you don't believe this. I have gotten up and gotten dressed and gone out in the cold just for a cup of coffee. And I see from your smiles that some of you have done the exact same thing. Sometimes it's something that's there and we think, I can almost just taste it or smell it, right? I want to go and I want to experience it again. There's some things you see that take some effort, right? Sometimes getting that cup of coffee that's just the right cup. Sometimes making a cup of coffee that looks like that one would be really cool. I'd like to learn how to do that. And so it takes effort, though, to do those kind of things. It takes some effort, too, for us to be right with God. It's sad to see that some people will get up and go out on a cold morning, drive across town, or do whatever they had to do to go get a cup of coffee, but won't put in any effort to make sure their relationship with God is what it ought to be. There's folks that know that they ought to get up on Sunday mornings and get here and be in worship services. Don't. There's some people that have heard the gospel, the good news of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, but for whatever reason have failed to put it into practice, have not heard really the truth enough to really believe it, because if they had, they would be willing to repent of sins, confess faith, and be baptized into Christ. We need to do those things, don't we? We need to have faith and action to go with it. We've already talked about it from the book of James, that in order for us to receive those blessings that come from being in God, we got to get up and get moving. So here's the appeal tonight, okay? Be willing to do more for God than you would for a cup of coffee. Right? Be willing to get up and move in God's direction. Be willing to become a Christian if you're not one already. And if you are a Christian but you haven't been faithful, then come back and be restored. And make that commitment that, hey, I am going to make every effort that it takes to be pleasing to God. If you need to respond to God's invitation tonight, it stands open. And we would invite you to respond without delay. If you're here in person and you need to respond, of course, you can just walk to the front. One of our shepherds will meet you. Or if you're watching virtually, you can call or text 334-763-0667. But don't wait. If you need to respond, do it now as we stand and as we sing together.